Is that the login? Would you be logged in on with that and then change your name? Somebody else in your home have that name? We can communicate outside of class. I just want to make sure I give you credit. All right. So full disclosure, I think my Zoom did an update. And the fun thing with Zoom updates is they don't really tell me what they do, they just do. So if something doesn't seem to go smooth today, I'm blaming Zoom. All right, so we are at our commission math. And before we get into it, as a reminder, we need to make sure we're good on this verbiage because as we get into commission math, as we get into contracts in the next couple units, we're going to start seeing the verbiage of the selling agent and the listing agent. Again, buyer's agent, seller's agent, that's just what we say when we're running around the streets talking to people. Our technical terms, our technical tags, if you will, are the ings. So we're going to see those on our forms. You guys are going to see that with practice questions with commission math. You're going to have to find commission for the listing firm or the selling agent, for example. So make sure we're good. If you don't have this, please do a quick screenshot so you can refer back to it. Again, getting familiar with the verbiage. And where we are, we're starting today on page 245 in the math concepts at the end of unit 8. And before we left each other last week, we introduced you to the idea of the commission map, MAP. And the commission map is what you're looking at on 245. So we talked about how you're going to deal with the total commission at the top. The first split, we're going to split that commission between the firms. Once the firm has been paid, then we split again. The firm keeps some and the agent gets some. Every single problem has got to tell you what the firm is collecting. Every single problem has got to tell you about the agent's commission split of their firm because price fixing says they're all different. There is no standard, there is no normal, there is no typical. So each problem will have to tell you this is what the firm expects to collect. This is what they're going to share with their agent. So if we take what's on page 245 and we put it more into generic terminology, what you're looking at 245 is what you're looking at here. So you have at the top, you start with the total commission or the sales price. Another thing to understand about commission math, every time you go down a tier, every time you go down a level, they're all worded differently, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They're all worded differently. And the best way to prepare yourself for commission math is to practice. Because when you practice, you expose yourself to the several different ways that they can ask you the question. But it can all be solved using this commission commission math. So we start at the top with our commission or our sales price. Again, maybe they give you the total commission. Maybe they tell you how to find the commission. Maybe they tell you the side. They're all different. The map is the guide. It gives us our basis. So from the top, then we split between the sides. The selling side is going to get some. The listing side is going to get some. Again, this doesn't have to be a 50-50 split. Maybe it is. Maybe it's a 30-70 split. Maybe the listing side's getting more than the selling side. There is no typical. There is no normal. Everybody hearing me? Always do what the problem tells you. Bottom line though, when you add the sides together, no matter how they're split, when you add those sides together, they should total the total commission. They should total the total commission being paid. Once the side has been paid, then we're going to take that side's commission and we're going to come down to another tier and we're going to split it again. The firm will keep some The firm will give some to their agent. Again, how much are they giving to the agent? The problem's got to tell you. The problem has got to tell you. Question comes in about the selling agent. Why is it called that? The ing is the verb, you guys. The ing is the action. And if you are selling something, who are you talking to? You're talking to the one that's buying it. If you're selling a car, who are you selling it to? Selling it to the buyer. The ing is the verb. The ing is the action. If you're listing, what are you doing? What's your action? You're listing it. You're putting the market on sale, you're putting the property on the market, making it for sale, making it available. So the ing is the verb. So yeah, the selling side, once we have the selling side's commission, then we take it a step further and split it. Again, not always a 50-50 split, but when you add up what the firm is getting and you add up what the agent's getting, it should total what the side collected, what the firm collected. We're going to look at T-bars in a second as well. I think that the map is more helpful than the T-bars because the map helps us see where we're starting and where we want to end. And every time you come down a tier, it's safe to say we got to pick up a calculator. So these are going to be multi-step problems. You may first have to find the side's commission or the firm's commission, and then split it again between the firm and the agent. We can remember T-bar 101. Let's go back. When did we introduce you to the T-bar? Like class 2, I think. T-bar 101. Where does the rate or percent go? Rate or percent always goes on the bottom right. So it may give you the commission rate. It may tell you the firm split as a percentage. It may tell you the agent split as a percentage. It's got to give you that commission rate. And then T-bar 101 says the part over the whole. And generally speaking, we have one example in this class where the number on top is not smaller than the number in the bottom left. And we haven't made it there. It's about the last math we do. So you don't need to worry about it just yet. Generally speaking, when we're talking about T-bar 101, we got the part over the whole. And generally speaking, the part is going to be smaller than the whole. So the first tier might be to find the selling side commission, for example. Selling side. And what they give you is the sales price. So we use T-bars, absolutely. Y'all know me. But I think it's easier to understand the basics of the T-bar because once we understand the basics of the T-bar, then we can understand, well, the selling side commission is smaller than the sales price. The selling side commission is smaller than the total commission. In each tier, each time we come down, we're going to use that T-bar again. Rate or percent always goes in the bottom right. But now that we have the selling side, we want to split it again between the selling agent and the selling firm. So it might be now that the new part is what the agent's going to get, the whole. Now the selling side is bigger than what the agent's getting. T-bar 101, the part over the whole. And each time you come down a tier, each time you come down a level, we have an opportunity to use a T-bar if it works for you. If it doesn't work for you, our steps when we're moving down the commission map are to multiply. And that may help you set up your T-bar too. Because remember, that's our up-down line in the T-bar, right? Is to multiply. So what goes where in the T-bar? Rate or percent always goes in the bottom right. And then after that, we have the part over the whole. And that T-bar is going to change each time we come down a tier, each time we come down a level. So this is the map or our guide. And we're going to do, of course, we're going to do a couple together. And I got plenty of practice for you guys. This is the math that you're going to start when you practice. the word problems start getting longer. They're going to start throwing in words like selling and listing. So again, I think the map, I recommend drawing the map out as you're learning to do these problems so you can see what happens with that commission, so you can see how it's split. Commission math is also where they love to give you guys distractors. What's a distractor's job? Its whole purpose is to distract you. So how do you win against the distractors? How do you beat the distractors? Map it out. Draw yourself a picture. Give yourself a visual so you know. I'm starting with the total commission, for example. The problem gives me the total commission, and it wants to know what's the listing agent, what is the listing agent going to collect. So the map shows me that I need to go from here to here to here. And all the steps I take to get here, each step, each tier, is when I need to pick up a calculator. You guys have this in front of you? Do you have it drawn out? Please refer to it. I know sometimes we want to be the hero and say, well, I don't need to use it. You got it. Use it while you're learning it. No, you can't use it for your test. But while you're learning it, while you're practicing it, until you get the hang of it, I recommend you use the map. Questions so far? Okay, well, let's do one together. Just talk it through using our map. So the first thing we do when we see a word problem is just read, breathe and read. A home is listed for 230,000. It sells for 227,000 with a 6% total commission being charged. The listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5% of the sales price. Based on this information, what is the listing side commission on the sale? So I've read that, and instead of throwing down a T-bar, I'm going to map it out. So we start at the top with our total commission, our sales price, and we're going to split it between the sides. So you got the selling side and the listing side. This question, that's as far as it goes, isn't it? Because what's it's asking me for? What is it? What is my unknown? In this case, it's just asking me, what is the listing side going to collect? So by mapping it out, it allows me to see, this is my X. It allows me to see, this is as far as I need to go to answer that question. So let's see what we got. Let's fill in our map. So the home is listed for 230 and it sells for 227. What does our map tell us? Commission is based off the listing price or is based off the sales price? Commission is based off of the, let me see your mouse move, please. It's based off of the sales price. What's it matter what we list it for, right? I can list it for anything. Is that what a buyer's willing to pay for? No. So right out the gate, there's one of your distractors. Listing price, not important. What do we care about? The sales price. So I know the listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5%. Total commission is 6. So I got total commission is 6%, and I have a sales price of 227,000. I'm going to give you 2.5%. If I'm giving you, if the listing firm is giving the selling firm 2.5%, how much is the listing firm going to keep for themselves? And you can tell me in the chat or on mute. Yeah. So total commission, yeah, total commission is 6%. I'm giving you 2.5%. What's left for me? 3.5%. So what's the listing side going to collect of the total commission? 3.5%. Questions just on that piece? They are. I'm not done with it yet. I'm just asking for questions on this piece, how we got 3.5%. So now we can fill in the rest of our T-bar, part over the whole. So I'm dealing with what the listing side's getting, and I'm dealing with the sales price. Which one's smaller? What the side is getting. So that tells me that's my X. Remember, when you're working down the map, you multiply. So that may help you set up your T-bar as well. The up-down line in the T-bar means multiply. So you know you're working down, you have your map as your guide, and you know that line right there means multiply. So then we take 227,000 times 3.5%. And how much is the side going to collect? $7,945. Had the problem gone on to talk about the agent's commission split, which we're going to see one in the next problem. Had the problem gone on, then we could take that 79.45 and split it again. Now that we know what the side's going to get, the side is going to give some of their commission to the agent. How much? We don't know. But if I were to set this up, I'd have what the side is getting. I'd have the percentage that they would have to tell us, and we would be solving for the agent or the firm's commission, depending on what the firm's asking for. Each tier requires us to pick up a calculator. If you're a T-bar fan, each tier, we can use a T-bar. The problem's got to tell you the percentages, or in this case, how we get to the percentages. What questions do I have? So why don't you guys set your chats for private? Just to me, you should still be able to do that. I never know with the Zoom update what they're going to do. Can you guys still, are you still able to set your chats to private? Good. I think an email would be nice. You don't understand what the T-bar, and I get that. So then your other option would just be to multiply, which is what we did here. So if you don't want to use the T-bar, then your formula in this case would be the sales price times the listing side's commission. All we're doing is multiplying. I'll just go copying, so, right. So tell me in a private chat, you guys are ready to go. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D, please at least try. Y'all, if you're sitting there right now going, I can't do this, then you're probably right. But what I'm encouraging you to do is break that wall down and give it a try. What's the worst thing that could happen? Everybody with me? All right, private chat, A, B, C, or D, put pencil to paper and see what happens. Later. Give you about 30 more seconds and then we're going to talk about it. While you guys are finishing up, I need to make a little adjustment here. Okay, so let's see what we got. Elizabeth lists a property for sale and her firm has a written policy of charging 7% on all transactions. Listing firm has agreed they will cooperate with a firm that brings a buyer by offering them 3% of the total sales price. Elizabeth's commission split is 70%. Based on this information, how much commission will Elizabeth earn if she sells the property for $285,000? Who's the only person I care about in this problem? One person. That's my girl, Elizabeth, right? That's it. That's all I care about. That's one way to help eliminate your distractions. Stop and ask yourself, what is this property? What is this question asking me? Because if that doesn't get you to this answer, then it doesn't matter. Eliminate distractions, use the map to help you out. Elizabeth, what role does Elizabeth play? If she's listing the property, that makes her my listing agent. So let's map out what we have. We're going to start at the top, 285, and I got a total commission of 7%. And then we're going to split that between the sides. So you got the selling side getting a commission, and you got the listing side getting a commission. Then we're going to take the listing side's commission and we're going to split it again between the listing firm, what they're going to collect, and our girl, Elizabeth. So the only thing I care about in this problem, and this is what the map helps us do, the only thing I care about is the information I need to get from here to here, here to here. That's where the map can help. It's your guide. It helps you guide through this problem, guide through this transaction. So we have a sales price, we have a total commission. I also have the listing firm that has agreed to cooperate with the firm that brings a buyer by offering them 3%. So here, you bring me a buyer, I will pay you 3%. How much is the firm going to keep for themselves? The firm's going to keep, and I can see, yep, I can see you. So if we're going to give you 4%, that means we get to keep, 3%. That means we get to keep 4% for ourselves. So the first split is to figure out how much did the firm collect? How much did the side get? And we know the side is getting 4% of the sales price. So all we're doing, T-bar or not, 285,000, that fancy word of tells us to multiply. So we have our sales price times 4% gives me a side of, nope. 11,400. So 285,000 times 4% tells me that the side is going to collect $11,400. So let's put that up here. So 4% is 11,400. Questions so far? How do we get the listing firm's commission? Now we get to deal with the 70%, because once the firm's been paid, they're going to share some of their commission with the agent. How much is the firm going to share in this case with Elizabeth? Of what I collected, I'm going to give Elizabeth 70%. And there's your second split, or your second tier, if you will. So T-bar fans, I now know the side commission. I know Elizabeth's getting 70% of that, heart over the whole. So to solve for Elizabeth's commission, I'm going to take 11,400 times 70%, and that gives us 7,980, or B. This is why we practice, so we can work those kinks out now. I always ask you guys, you want to work the kinks out now, or you want to wait till test day to figure it out? You kind of got two choices here. I suggest working them out now. Also remember, the math alone can't fail you. This is not a math test. This is a real estate exam with some math in it. But do you think commission math is important to you? Is commission math important? Yeah, yeah. And when you get with your firm, use something similar to the map to figure out how you can get paid. I always tell new agents to, once you get with your firm and you know what the split is, let's pretend you're Elizabeth for a second. I always tell agents to figure your commission with the sales price of 100,000. 100,000 is a good round number. It's a good place to start. So if you're getting ready to show a home that is listed for 200,000, you can easily calculate your commission. Questions on this one? Okay, let's do another one. Private chat, A, B, C, or D. Read, look for that word of. About 30 seconds and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So let's see what we got with this one. Julie's Real Estate Shop is listing a property for sale with an agreement from the seller to pay 6% of the sales price. The listing firm agrees to compensate the selling firm with 40% of the total commission when they procure that ready, willing, and able buyer. How much will Julie's Real Estate Shop collect on a transaction if the home sells for $300,000? So again, the first thing I suggest is take the words of the problem and turn it into your map. So at the top, we have our total commission and our sales price. Then we're going to split it between the sides, the selling side and the listing side. Asking myself, what am I solving for? And in this case, we're solving only for the listing side's commission. We're not going to have to go any further. The problem's asking me, what will the listing firm collect? So that's going to be my X. I know of the total commission, we're going to give 40% to the selling side, which means how much of the total commission are we going to keep for ourselves? You guys can all show me, at least the first digit. How much are we going to keep for ourselves? Yeah, we're going to keep, what's 40? We're going to keep 60%. So of the total commission, yeah, don't get bogged down in that. Because we only get paid when it closes. So we can dream, but we don't actually have that coming. Okay, questions on the 60% split. How do we get 60% for the listing side? Julie's Real Estate Shop. That 60% is of, not the sales price, it's of what? It's of the total commission. Do I know to the total commission? Not yet, but I need to find that first, right? So we're going to start, again, they're all different. That's what makes these so much fun. We're going to start, first thing we have to do is find the total commission. Rate or percent always goes here. Commission is smaller than the sales price. So the first step is to take 300,000 times 6%, what the T-bar tells me to do, which gives me total commission of $18,000. So step one is to find that total commission. Now that I know the total commission, I know that 60% is of the total commission. So my total commission, we just decided, was 18,000. We are looking at 60%. So 18,000 times 60% equals 10,800, or read the problem, ask yourself, what's this problem asking? What's this problem want me to solve? Again, lots of distractors. The only thing I care about is who the problem's asking me for, and that should help your math. That should help you see where in your math you want to end. Questions on this one? The 60%, of course. So if I am paying you, the listing firm is paying the selling firm 40%, that means what we have left for us is 60. Total commission 100%. That split, of course, is a 40-60 split. This isn't me being mean. This is me preparing you for these exams. I can make this stuff really easy, but that wouldn't be fair to you. Questions? We got plenty of practice. Plenty of practice. Yeah. I'm erasing the pink. Everybody good? Pink's going once, going twice. Another type of commission math is called the graduated commission. And where we see the graduated commission most often is commercial sales. So these last couple problems we've been working with the map, we mostly see in residential sales. You split with the side, and then the side shares their commission with the agent. The next piece of commission that you do not have in your book is called graduated commission. And I got practice for you, don't worry. The fun thing about graduated commission, I don't really have a formula for it. It's one of those, I'm going to ask you to hold your nose and I'm getting ready to chuck you into the deep end. Everybody ready? The best way I know how to do graduated commission is just to do it. So we're going to do one together. We're going to talk through one together. And then, of course, I'll have one for you guys to try and plenty of practice. So graduated commission. Let's just first look at the problem together. A firm pays their brokers a commission based on the graduated sales commission plan. Per the agreement, the firm will pay 5% commission on the first 200,000 of the sales price, 3% on the next 200,000, and 1% on any amount over that. How much commission will the firm receive on a sales price of 900,000? So with graduated commission, we start with the sales price. And this again is a tiered kind of basis, but it's a different type of tier than what we just saw. So we start with that sales price of 900,000. The firm's graduated commission plan says that on the first 200,000, we're going to pay 5%. On the next 200,000, we're going to pay 3%. And then on any amount over that, we're going to pay 1%. So I started with the sales price of 900,000. I used up 200,000. I used up another 200,000. How much do I have left? And you can show me the first number. How much do I have left? What's any amount over that? Is 500,000. Once we use up those tiers, once we use up, then what we have left is going to be the sales price minus what we've used. That's what we have left in this case to pay a 1% commission. Before we pick up our calculators, what questions do I have? So now we pick up our calculators. 200,000 times 5% is 10,000. 200,000 times 3% is 6,000. 500,000 times 1% is 5,000. And when I add all that up, how much do we get for the firm's commission? We get 21,000. It's going to be X amount for part of the sales price, X amount for another part of the sales price. All of it depends on, it all starts with the sales price. This is what the firm is going to get. The firm then, like we just saw, may split their commission amongst themselves and their agent. They would take that 21,000 and split it per the agent's compensation plan. And we're going to see that split. We'll do that in the next problem. One step at a time. Questions on how we got the firm's commission? We're ready to do it. Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. About 30 more seconds. We'll talk about it. Okay. I feel like we feel better about graduated commission overall. What do we think? A little bit better, not as bad, thumbs ups. Okay, so commission building is listed for 1.75 million. Per the firm's compensation policy, brokers are paid 60% of the firm's commission. The split is as follows. We're going to pay 10% on the first 600,000, 7% on the next 400, and 4% on any amount over that. If the building sells for 1.65 million, what will the broker get? So we start with the sales price. Again, don't care what you list it for. It's one distraction they like to give you. Our formulas tell us it's not about the listing price, it's about the sales price. So we sold it for 1,650,000. Back to the problem. I know on the first 600,000, we're going to collect a 10% commission. Oops. And then 7% on the next 400. And then 4% on any amount over that. So we started with 1,650,000. We deducted 600,000. We deducted 400,000. So what do we have over that? We have 650,000, in which case we're going to pay 4%. Questions so far? So now we pick up our calculators. 600,000 times 10% is 60,000. 400,000 times 7% is 28. And then 650 times 4% is 26. We add all that up to get the firm's split of 114,000. Is that what you guys got? 114,000 for the firm. Thumbs up, head bobs, cool. I evidently updated this one from the last time I did it because my notes are out of date. So I'm working it with you guys. So we got the firm collecting $114,000. The firm has a policy to pay their agent 60% of their compensation. So now that we know what the firm's compensation is, we can split it. The firm is going to get 40%. And I know that because they are paying their agents 60%. So we'll do that split. The agent gets paid 60% of the firm's commission, which is what the problem's asking us for. Rate of percent always goes in the bottom right. Part over the whole. The agent's commission is smaller than the firm's. So the firm's commission of 114,000 up down line means multiply. How much are we getting paid? 68,400 or anybody thinking about commercial now? There's some bigger numbers with commercial than there are residential. Before you get too excited, you got to take all things into consideration. The truth is, residential, I can get you closed in 45, 60 days, easy. Commercial could take a year. 3. Commercial is a totally different beast. So before you drop your residential dreams for dollar signs, what I'm saying is just look into it, explore your options. Questions on how I got you paid $68,400? It's not a bad day paycheck. Okay. Let's go ahead and take our break. When we come back, we are the next piece of math is seller net. And then we're going to Kahoot. And then we'll be done with agency. So let's take 10. Grab your phones if you don't have them. We'll finish up 8, move on to some contracts. Go back. So I'm going to take attendance. And the last piece of math in Unit 8 is called seller net. And with seller net, basically the seller's looking at you and saying, what could you sell my house for in order for me to net X amount? So with most of these problems, they're going to tell you what the seller wants to collect. The question to you is, what's the sales price? What do you have to sell their house for in order for the seller to net? So let's back up for a second. When we talk about seller net, we're talking about their proceeds. We're talking about the amount that they will collect once they sell their home. Remember all those lien holders standing in line? Real estate agents, commission, attorneys, all the people involved that the seller has to pay for the contract to closing process. Everybody's standing in line with their hands out, waiting on closing day so they can get paid. And the very last person in that line is the seller. So do you think that comes up in listing appointments? I need to make X amount. Can you sell my house and put that in my pocket? Do you think that's a common thing? Absolutely. Absolutely. You may even have a seller tell you, if I don't make extra X amount, then I can't sell my house. So before we ever do anything else, we want to make sure that we can sell their home for what they need to net. And that's where we're heading now. So let's first look at our T-bar. Rate or percent always goes where? Always goes in the bottom right. In this case, the rate or percent that we're dealing with is the seller's rate. We will talk in just a second how we get to the seller's rate. The sales price is generally what you're going to be solving for. So what do you sell the house for in order for the seller to net X amount? The number that goes on top is all of the seller's debits. Their liens, outstanding mortgages, anything they owe an attorney, excise tax, any debit of the sellers that the problem gives you. Always do what the problem says. All their debits except commission. I will get you paid. Don't worry about it. But our commission does not go on the top. So all of their debits, everything they owe, plus whatever it is they want to net. I can't calculate our commission yet, because remember what we just said, what we're solving for is the sales price. And our commission is a percentage of the sales price. So I don't have a number to put in there. Some of you really want to put commission on the number at top, but you don't have a number until we solve this problem. Does that make sense? So to combat that, we're going to calculate our commission in that seller's rate. That's where the commission will be calculated. We'll look at that. I just want to make sure everybody has the T-bar first. So the seller's debits plus their net, what they want to take away, it's part of the sales price, which is what we're solving for. And then the number on the bottom right is dealing with the seller's rate. So jot this down. We're going to talk about a few more things before we do a couple together. Okay. We have the T-bar written down in front of you where you can refer to it. So let's talk about more about what's in this T-bar. When we talk about the seller's debits, we talked about their lien holders, their outstanding mortgages, anything they have to pay. You may get thrown some numbers that I don't know if it's a seller debit or a buyer debit. And that's what we're looking at here. Things that could go either way. but we're going to do what's typical to our market, what's standard to our market. When we talk about the seller's debits, unless you're told otherwise, the seller will pay commission. The seller will pay to have the deed prepared, and the seller will pay excise tax. If you're told otherwise, always do what the problem tells you. If the problem doesn't give you excise tax, don't worry about excise tax. Just deal with the numbers that the problem gives you. I always say if you can remember your alphabet, you can remember C, D, E. So if you start singing to yourself, you don't have to get too long, right? A, B, C, D, E. Commission, deed preparation fee, and excise tax. In addition to their outstanding liens, mortgages, unpaid property taxes. Again, only dealing with the numbers that they give you in the problem. The other piece of this is the seller's rate. And to talk about seller's rate, let's talk about pie. And let's pretend that the whole pie represents the sales price. The sales price belongs to the seller. The seller is going to take the sales price and pay all those lien holders, pay all that outstanding debt. The seller is going to give us a very small piece of the pie. The problem has got to tell you what, I'm going to be generous here. Let's give ourselves a 10% commission. The problem has got to tell you what commission the seller has agreed to pay. Once the seller pays our commission, the seller's rate is whatever is left. The number that goes in the T-bar is whatever's left. So we started with 100%. They gave me 10%. So what's the seller's rate? The seller's rate, what goes in the T-bar, is 90%. And that's how we calculate the seller's rate. You take 100% minus the commission. Once they give us a very small piece of their pie, then the rest of it is for them to pay all that debt, pay all those liens off so they can convey that clear marketable title. So the problem will have to tell you commission, and we use that to find the seller's rate, the number that goes in the bottom right of the T-bar. Questions before we look at a couple examples together? Okay. So we know the drill, right? We're going to do one together, and then we're going to do other liens get paid before I do? Yes, because now we're in lien priority, right? In lien priority, I'm near the end. I'm after, the lien holders. I'm in line, and I will get my 10% of the sales price. We're not talking about order. We're talking about calculating seller's net. So we're going to do one together, and then I'll have one turn you loose and have one for you guys. So let's look at one together. First, we just read. A property owner wishes to net $56,500 from the sale of her small building. She has to pay off her existing mortgage of $115,000, and she's got $12,500 in outstanding liens. The seller has agreed to pay the listing firm a 7% commission. What is the minimum price this property must sell for in order for the seller to net $56,500? So we've read the problem. We know we can throw down a T-bar. And with these, what we're solving for, what is our unknown, is the sales price. We have to find, what can I sell your house for in order for you to net $56,500? The number that goes on top is all of the seller's debits. So they have a mortgage of $115,000. They have outstanding liens of $12,500. Plus, they want a net $56,500. So if we take their liens, all their debit plus their net, the number that goes on top is $184,000. Only the debit that the problem gives us. If it doesn't give you a number or a way to find it, you can't use it. Just do what the problem says. Questions on how I got the 184,000? Seller's debits plus what they want to net, what they want to put in their pocket when it sells. Now we're going to figure out the seller's rate. And to figure out the seller's rate, we're always going to think about pi. Pi represents the sales price, 100%. And of that pi, the seller has agreed to give us 7%. So how much will the seller keep for themselves? The seller will have a rate of 93%. This is the key. This is the trick to understanding seller net, is getting that seller rate right. So if the whole pie represents their sales price, and of that pie, they're giving you 7%, that means they have 93% left for themselves to pay off all this debt and hopefully put the 56.5 in their pocket. Questions on how I got my T-bar set up? That fourth line on the T-bar means divide. So we take 184,000 divided by 93%. So I get a sales price, and I'm just going to look at 840.46. And they may want you to round. Questions tell you if they want you to round. I just rounded because it's rare to see a price list, a home listed for 197,849.46, but you can. So 184,000 divided by 93% gives me a minimum sales price of 197,849.46. Again, the problem may want you to round. It'll tell you, please don't worry about rounding. So what this is saying, what did we just do? I've got to, in order for me to put 56,500 in their pocket, I've got to sell their house for 197,850. If I sell it for anything less than that, the seller won't get 56.5 because they still have to pay off their mortgage. They still have to pay off those liens, and they have a contractual obligation and a listing agreement to pay me. So they can't not pay that stuff. If I sell their home for more than 197,850, that's more money I can put in their pocket. Now I have a happy seller, right? Now that I know what the sales price is to put 56.5 in their pocket, now we got to do our research. We got to study our comparables. We got to make sure that this area, this neighborhood, this market will support a sales price of 197,850. If your seller says, this is what I have to do to sell, and you do your CMA and you find out the average sales price in this area was 155 to 163,000, am I going to be able to sell their house for 197,850 unless they have something really special going on, something that makes them really unique, right? Looking at the numbers, y'all, I don't know much about life, but one thing I know is that the numbers don't lie. And that's what we get when we look at those CMAs that's coming in Unit 17. I get a probable sales price in a range. And based on what other buyers were willing to buy in this area, in this market, I don't know that I can sell your house for 197,850. So before we sign this listing agreement, we gotta talk, don't we? And that's where it all comes together. Never, ever, ever make promises to sellers especially when it comes to their money, without you doing your research, without you pulling those comps and making sure you can do it. Questions on this one? Questions on seller net before you guys do one? Another question is, okay, this is all fine and dandy, but what's my commission? Well, now that we have the sales price, we can determine the firm side is 7% of the sales price. I can't answer that until we get a sales price. So if you really want to know what your firm is going to collect, now that you know the sales price, you can figure that out. Still don't know your commission split. I think the key to these, when you guys see seller net, why don't you put on your seller's hat? Don't see through the eyes of an agent with these problems. Who do we care about? We care about the seller and what I have to sell their home for in order for them to net, in this case, 56.5. Questions? Tell me in a private chat, A, B, C, or D. About 30 more seconds and we'll talk about it. Okay. So let's talk about Jessica. Jessica wishes to make 80,000 on the sale of her home. She has to pay off her mortgage of 400,000. She's got closing costs of 4,000. Jessica has agreed to pay a 7% commission. Question is, what do we have to sell her home for in order for her to net, in order for her proceeds, in order for her to make $80,000? When in doubt, if you're ever stuck on a math problem, I suggest just throwing down a T-bar, giving yourself something to play with, and the T-bar just lets you fill some numbers in. I know what I'm solving for is my sales price. The number that goes on top is her debt plus what she has to net. So she still has a balance of 400,000. She's got closing costs of 4,000, and then she wants 80,000 to put in her pocket when this thing closes. So all of her debits except commission plus her net gives us a number on top for $484,000. Questions on how I got that? Then we got to figure out the seller rate. We do that by thinking of our pie and knowing 100% is the sales price, 100% belongs to the seller. But the seller has agreed to give us a piece of their pie. If the seller's giving us 7%, how much do they keep for themselves? I can see mouths move. How much do they keep for themselves? They're going to keep 93%. This is the seller's rate. No, you're on. So in the last step, now that we have our T-bar complete, take 484,000. That fourth line in the T-bar means divide. Divide it by 93,000. And I get 520, 430.110, or if you want to round, 520, 430. What we're looking for here is C. Can I sign their house for that? Am I really ready to sign a listing agreement and tell them I can sell their house for that? I don't know yet. We're not done, right? We just got started. This gave me somewhere to start. This gave me a number to work with. Now I got to go back and do some research. Yeah, this piece of it is very, very real. I had a seller once. We'll just use these numbers since we're looking at them. But he looked at me. It was not a $520,000 home. I wish it was. But he looked at me and said, I've got to make $80,000. If I don't make $80,000, then I can't afford to sell my house. So I'm trying to decide, do I sell now or do I rent it? And this is where that seller was. And y'all, he kind of drove me a little nuts because his answer to everything was, I don't care as long as I make $80,000. Like, hey, we got an offer. You want to accept it? I don't care as long as I make $80,000. They're asking for repairs. Do you want to do any? I don't care as long as I make $80,000. The man was not trying to be difficult. The man was not trying to be hard to get along with. You know what the man cared about? $80,000. Did I have a material fact on my hand? If it's important to my seller, did I have a material fact on my hand? You better believe I did. You better believe, because that was the most important thing to him, was putting X amount in his pocket. Does that make sense? I overinflated his numbers because he was so adamant about getting X amount. I exaggerated some of his numbers just to give me plenty of wiggle room to make sure I could still do this. So I encourage you, some of you like to live on the edge, and I think that's great. I think that's a lot of fun. But when you're dealing with somebody else's money, somebody else's figures, give yourself some wiggle room, give yourself some leeway. Questions on this? Can I erase the pink? Everybody good? See head bobs, we're good. Agency, y'all, we did it. You feel like you accomplished something today? You should, you did. We got through what? Almost 2-week agency discussion. Big section, big piece of your test. Unit 8, again, it all starts with knowing those key terms. If you don't know what the word means, look it up. You got a glossary in the back of your book. You got Google. Look it up. That key point review serves as a good review. Again, it's not a supplement of the book. It's a review. And then you got your student quiz on 251. There is some math that we just went over there. I got more for you guys as well. There's some practice, by the way. There's some practice. Go back to your books. Let's look back at our commission map on page 245. Because I don't think you're going to see anything than what we're seeing on 245 on your exam, but you're going to have some practice. It's going to sound a little funny. And I don't think the practice is bad, because I think if you can work the practice, then you are well prepared for your exam. But on 245, you know, to get from the first tier to the second tier to the third, the steps we took working down the map were to multiply. So what I mean by that is they gave us the numbers on the top. They gave us the 6% commission and the sales price, and we had to find Agent Ted's commission. So we worked down the map, and the steps we took there to get there were to multiply. What's the opposite of multiply? Divide. So if you're working up the map, let's just say the problem told you Agent Ted got paid $5,670 and they want to know what the sales price is. Now you're working up, and the steps you take to get there are to divide. Again, for your exam, I feel pretty comfortable saying you're going to work your top the way down, but I'm telling you, if you can do it backwards, you are good to go. You are well practiced. So I just wanted to prepare that. You're going to see some of those in your practice. We've got those 50 problems at the end of the book, at the end of the, near the end of the book. These are the numbers that relate to the math that we just did. So you're going to have the map, you're going to have seller net. Again, no graduated commission in your book, but I got you in the online learning system. We'll look at that in just a second. These are the numbers that relate to the math that we just did for practice. No more math again until we get through contracts. After contracts, we do financing. So we got another week or so where we get a break in math, which gives you guys an opportunity to work on some commission math. I'm going to say financing is heavy math because it's financing. So those are coming in units 14 and 15, but you get a break. And then in the online learning system, we have a commission and seller net math worksheet. So it walks out through some of the different maths. Graduated commission is in here. And then, of course, we got the solutions for you. Studying the solutions doesn't do you any good. Just use it to grade yourself to see how you did. I used the map and the T-bars, the steps you need to get there. So whichever works for you. This additional commission math, if you're so inclined, is practice working up, taking those steps to divide. So, I mean, again, if you can work it backwards, you are good to go. There's also some in that Unit 8 quiz in the online learning system as well. Questions? Comments? All right, let's Kahoot. Officially wrapping up agency. This is another true and false. This is just specific to Unit 8. Quick little review. True, false, and what we learned from 8. So you can join. Here is your QR code. Easiest way to get to it. If you're going through the website or the app, you need a game pin. This Kahoot is just from Unit 8. True, false. T-Bar Jason. I have fans. Where are my fans? How am I doing? T-Bar lovers? I'm working on you. I'm working on you. Yeah, don't worry if I haven't gotten you yet. I will. Remember, I don't make you Kahoot. Don't require it. However, if you're not playing on your phone, I just ask that you play on your mind. Anybody in that wants to play? All right. Your phone went to sleep. Is this not you? Yeah. All right. Let's Kahoot. Unit 8 review. All true and false. Question number 1. All written agency agreements must include the broker's license number. Seven seconds. This one is true. What are our 4 musts of any written agency agreement? It's got to be signed by all parties, has to include the broker's license number, has to have a definite end date, and it's got to contain our non-discrimination clause. 4 musts of all written agency agreements. Because the broker is the one signing on behalf of the firm, one must is that we have the broker's license number. Questions on this one? So see what we got out the gate here. T-Bar Jason came out first, followed by Cam and Lauren, Amari and Anna. Question number 2. Commission rule tells firms how much commission to charge consumers. Good job. Who determines how much the firm charges? Everybody say it with me. The firm. Real Estate Commission doesn't care what the firm charges. The National Association of Realtors, the local board of realtors, the local government, the local business, whatever. The firm determines their commission. The firm determines how much they charge. Questions on this one? If this is easy to remember, the commission doesn't get involved with commission. The real estate commission doesn't get involved with our money. If you're not happy with your firm's commission split, do not call the real estate commission. There's nothing they can do for you. Find another firm. It's pretty simple. Questions? T-Bar Jason still on top. Dayosh, Hope, followed by Lauren and Dustin's on the board. Kazia's on the board. Sam is our, excuse me, highest climber, up 7 places this round. Question number 3. In an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, the seller has hired multiple listing firms. Exclusive tells us what? Just one. We're only dating one firm. That word exclusive means a whole lot, you guys. When you see that word exclusive in a question or an answer choice, stop and think. Remember, we talked about the exclusive buyer's agency agreement. Is the exclusive buyer agency's agreement in writing? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Exclusive buyer agency. Is it in writing? Yes, because you can't demand exclusivity in an oral agreement. That word exclusive means so much. Questions on this one? T-Bar Jason, still number 1. Kazia is up to number 2. Lauren, Bayosh, and Dustin are still on the board. Sierra is our highest climber, up 5 places. Question number 4. To include a space in the total heated square footage, the area must have windows. And that is false. In order to include it, what does it have? It's got to be finished. It's got to be heated. And it's got to be directly accessible. In order for us to count it in the total heated square footage, total heated living area, we got to have, what I just say, heated, finished, and directly accessible. Questions on this one? T-Bar Jason, Dayosh is on fire this round, up to 2nd place and on fire with 4 correct. Lauren, Dustin's up, Maria's on the board. Question number 5. Oral buyer agencies an express agreement with no specified period of time. Oral buyer agency. What's it mean to be express? If something is express, it means that the terms have been clearly stated. Maybe those terms have been stated orally. Maybe they've been stated in writing. Doesn't matter. Express means the terms have been clearly stated. The second piece of it is no specified period of time. An oral buyer agency, we can't put a time limit on our relationship. If I attempt to put a time limit on it, if I'm going to say you're going to work with me for 2 months, I got to put that in writing. So oral buyer agency is express, it's non-exclusive, and there's no specified period of time. Questions on this one? Oh, so we got Lauren is on top, Dustin's up, Anna's up, May May's on the board. Maria's still around. That was a tough round. That's all right. We got one more. We got one more. Last one. In an exclusive buyer agency agreement, buyer agrees to pay the firm's commission if the listing firm or seller will not. Five seconds. Exclusive buyer agency. Is this an oral agreement? Shake your head one way or another. Is this an oral agreement? Nah, this is in writing. How do I know that? Because you can't have exclusivity in an oral agreement. So when it says exclusive buyer agency, it's got to be in writing. Part of that buyer agency agreement says, that written buyer agency agreement says, as your agent, as the broker, I will always ask the listing firm to pay me first. But if they can't or won't, you're up, Mr. Buyer, and I expect to be paid X amount. We've got to talk about our commission. And that's why we put these things in writing, is to secure our commission. Questions on this one? All right. Final podium. Our third place winner is Maria, crept up a little bit. Our second place is Anna, crept up a little bit. Our first place is Dustin, definitely crept up. I got fourth and fifth runners up of Dayosh and Lauren. Good Kahoot. What questions do I have? All right. We are done with agency. You need to keep going. Did everybody hear what I just said? Your test is what? We're hovering around a month, a little over a month away. I promise you, if you don't touch agency between now and then, you're going to forget what you've learned. And you're going to have to work out those kinks and relearn it days before your exam. So please, please, please keep going back and reviewing agency, keeping it fresh in your mind so you'd be ready to test for it. Up next is contracts. So we're going to switch gears just a bit. 9 and 10 are also heavily tested units, so we're still on some pretty dense stuff. I'm not going to start a section now just to go to break. So let's go ahead and take our break. And when we come back, we will be ready to launch right into Unit 9. Back. Cameras are on. You can't hear the alarm. I know how to fix that. Hold up. You should be able to hear it now. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to, cameras are on and I can see you. So I'm going to take attendance. Let's talk about some contracts. Unit 9 is basic contract law. Unit 9 is like law school 101. Law students spend like a whole semester in Unit 9. We're going to blow through it in like an hour and a half, 2 hours, because we're not getting as in depth. We're not getting as detailed as one would if they were in law school, because we're not in law school. However, we work with contracts on a daily basis in real estate. And because we work with them on a daily basis, we need the basic in and outs of how they work. And that's what Unit 9 is about. I'm telling you right now, the key to Unit 9 are the terms. Having this basic understanding of what these contract words mean. So basic contract law, and then in Unit 10, we get more specific into our sales contract. But to have an understanding of how contracts work, we're first going to discuss some basic contract law. We're going to talk about the essential elements of a contract, how the judge determines the validity of a contract. We're going to define some contract concepts and some contract terms. So, first things first. Let's define a contract. Now, this is in your book on page 256, word for word. No shame to my game. But the first step in basic contract law is understanding what a contract is. A contract is a legally enforceable promise or set of promises between legally competent parties supported by legal consideration to do or refrain from doing a legal act that must be performed and for which the law provides a remedy if a breach of promise occurs. Do we kind of see a common theme? A word kind of repeated over and over and over again? A contract is a legally binding document. It's a legally binding document between two parties that have agreed to enter into the contract together. It's got to be supported by legal consideration, which we'll talk about, and it's got to be for a legal act. You cannot have a legally binding contract for an illegal purpose. And then contracts are going to have what happens if somebody breaches. If somebody breaches, it means they did or didn't do what they promised to do in the contract. They didn't withhold, they didn't keep their end of the deal, if you will. And you can't just expect, contract law just can't expect people to know how to act if the other party breaches. So we're going to actually spell out in the contracts what that means. So start with the definition. Understanding contracts are voluntary, which means the parties agree to enter into the contract together. You can't force anybody into a legally binding contract. There must be voluntary agreement. Contracts consist of agreement or promise between the legally competent parties. We're going to talk about the legality of the parties in this section. They're supported by some kind of legal consideration. When you guys see that word consideration, I want you to make a note. Consideration is something of value. What's the number one thing we think of with consideration? Money, money, money. But there could be other things that are considered consideration if it's something of value. Is, for example, in exchange for free rent. Is free rent something of value? Yeah, a free weekend at the beach. Is that something of value? A gift card to your favorite grocery store. Is that something of value? So I say that to say, I think sometimes we get in our own ways and we think, oh, consideration is money. Most of the time it is. But for our purposes, for any basic contract law purposes, understanding that consideration is just anything of value. And again, it's got to be for a legal act. You cannot have a legally binding contract for an illegal purpose. More on that in just a minute. Let's go ahead and define some contract terms. Two of these we've already seen again and again. Here they are again. Express versus implied. An express contract means that the terms have been clearly stated. An implied contract is one just demonstrated by your actions. Anything implied is demonstrated by your actions. We haven't entered into an express agreement, but we just start acting like we have a contract in place. As far as express in contract world, if you have a verbal contract, the old saying is, if you got verbal, you got nothing. Verbal does not stand up in a court of law. Verbal is unenforceable, that we will see in just a second. So contracts, to be enforceable in a court of law, have to be in writing. We could enter into a contract right now. We could shake hands on an agreement for me to sell you your house. No, me to sell you my house. What did I just say? We could shake hands and come to an agreement for me to sell you my house. The problem is what if one of us doesn't do what we're supposed to do? We take that to the judge. The judge is going to say, where's your written agreement? We don't have one. The judge is going to say, get out. So contracts are oral, written or oral contracts, there it is, are unenforceable. So express versus implied. Again, the key to express is knowing the terms have been clearly stated. Contracts can be unilateral or bilateral. In contract speak, lateral means side. So with a unilateral contract, how many parties have to perform? One side. In a bilateral contract, how many parties? Two. Most of what we do is a bilateral contract. Our agency agreements are bilateral contracts. Our sales contract that we will look at in Unit 10 is a bilateral contract. In real estate, we do have one unilateral contract, and that's our option to purchase that we will talk about at the end of Unit 10. So we will talk about our one unilateral, our one side contract when we get to 10. Thank you. Here. Contracts can also be executed or executory. An executed contract means all the promises have been fulfilled. It's complete. It's a done deal. And our sales contract for real estate, it means that it's closed. The seller's been paid, the buyer has the keys, the deed has been recorded. It's a done deal. An executory contract is a contract in motion. We're under contract, we're contractually obligated to each other, but we still have things left to do. Again, in real estate, an executory contract is our contract to closing process. All the things that happen from the day we go under contract to the day we close is an executory contract. More on that contract to closing process a little bit in Unit 10, and then we get more in depth in it in Unit 21. So executed, it's a done deal. Executory, it's one in motion, things still left to do. And we have figured out by now that real estate's one of those really fun industries, as with many others, that we have one word with different meanings, right? So executed is another one of those words. We could be referring to that it's closed. The promises have been fulfilled. Executed could also mean that something has been signed. So we got to use our context clues on what we're talking about here. Are we talking about the document's been signed? Or are we talking about the contract has been complete? So if we were to look at an example, we could say a seller and a buyer signed, i.e. executed, a purchase agreement creating a legally binding contract. Closing took place 6 weeks later. Prior to closing, the contract was executory, meaning that its terms remained to be performed. With the completed closing, the contract became executed because now the terms have been fulfilled. So executed, it's been signed or it's been fulfilled. Questions so far? So let's talk about the validity of contracts. Anybody want to venture a guess? Who do you think gets to determine the validity of a contract? Who is the one that gets to determine if this contract is valid or not? You think that's me and you? Is it your Bic? I'm seeing it come in the chat. It is the judge. So if we ever take a contract to a judge, one thing that the judge is going to determine is this valid or not? So the validity of contract, there's some terms to go over. I want you guys to either take a picture of this with your phone, fastest way, or take a second and jot this down like super quick, knowing you can come in and fill in the gaps later. But I think this is a really good chart to help us determine whether or not a contract is valid or void. The lines in this chart mean something. So if you're writing it down really fast, make sure you get the lines in. I'll give you guys just a minute, and then we'll talk about what all this means. We're going to break this down. So contracts can be one of two things. Contracts are either valid or void. Contracts are either valid or void. A valid contract contains the essential elements. This is what the judge is looking for. If you hand the judge a contract, they're going to say, is this valid? The judge is going to say, I need to make sure I see those essential elements. We are going to talk about those essential elements next. So contracts can either be valid because they have all the essential elements, or they're void because they don't. A valid contract is, unless challenged otherwise, a valid contract is enforceable, meaning it'll stand up on its own in a court of law. If you take an enforceable contract to a judge and say, I want out, the judge is going to say, this is a valid contract. It is enforceable in a court of law. If you get out, you're in breach. You don't have any way out. You don't have an excuse. If you get out, you will suffer the consequences of breach that are spelled out in the contract. So a valid contract, unless contested, is enforceable in a court of law. A valid contract could become voidable by one of the parties. That's important. One party has the option to take this valid contract to a judge and say, I shouldn't have to be required to fulfill the terms of this contract. We're going to talk about some examples of who that one person may be. Bear with me. With voidable, one of the parties takes the valid contract to the judge and say, I shouldn't have to carry through with the terms of this contract. The judge looks it over and says, you're absolutely right. The contract itself is valid. There's not a problem with the contract. The issue becomes with how many of the parties? Everybody show me. How many of the parties? Just one. Voidable can be voidable by one. Again, more on that second. A valid contract could also become unenforceable. Either party can take the contract to the judge and say, I shouldn't have to carry through with the terms of this contract. The contract itself is valid because it has all the essential elements. But now either party has the right to go to a judge and say, you can't bind me to this contract. It's not enforceable. It's unenforceable. The example we have of an unenforceable contract is that handshake agreement. That handshake agreement, because it's not in writing, it may have all the other essential elements, but because it's not in writing, it cannot be enforced in a court of law. So valid contracts, there is nothing wrong with the document itself. A valid contract can become enforceable, or it is enforceable. It can become voidable by the judge. It could become unenforceable by the judge. Compare that to a void contract that doesn't have all the essential elements. Maybe even if one essential element is missing, we don't have a valid contract. And with a void contract, it's not going to stand up in a court of law because, in a sense, you're missing one of those essential elements. You never had a contract to begin with. If this void contract or the voidable or the unenforceable contracts are never taken to the judge, they could still go on to completion. They could still go on to closing. It's the judge that determines voidable, unenforceable, or void. You and I can't make that decision. The parties can't make that decision. So if we never contest this unenforceable contract or this void contract, we could still go on to completion. We could still go on to closing, for example. It's the judge that determines it void, voidable, or unenforceable. So let's look at an example together. We're going to talk more about this. Yep. Thank you. I almost forgot to say that. Look with me on page 258. The example you have of a void contract for your exams. The example we have of a void contract is somebody that's been declared mentally incompetent by a court of law. And we're going to talk about, yes, and we will talk about when it is voidable, I promise. If the individual has been declared incompetent by a court of law, the judge will make that contract void. Does everybody see that? The example on page 2, what did I just say? 58. And we'll talk about who can make it voidable. Let's look at an example first. Steve and Ted orally agree that Ted will sell his home to Steve for $175,000. Neither Ted can enforce the oral contract against Steve, nor Steve against Ted. Ted and Steve may voluntarily carry out their agreement and complete the sale, but if either refuses, they have no legal remedy. It is unenforceable because it is oral. So these essential elements, if you take a contract to a judge and ask the judge to determine the validity of a contract, what the judge is looking for, they're looking for legally competent parties. The parties in order to complete the terms of the contract, must be of age. In North Carolina, that age is 18. If a minor enters into a contract, the minor can enter into the contract. The minor can't be forced to carry through with the terms of the contract. So if a 17-and-a-half-year-old takes this contract to a judge and says, I'm 17-and-a-half years old, the judge will make that contract voidable. How many parties have the right to make it voidable? Show me. How many? Just one. And in that example, that was the minor. The minor says, I shouldn't be expected to carry through with the terms of this contract because I'm not an adult. And the judge is going to say, you're right. This contract is voidable. Another example of who may make the contract voidable. Somebody that was intoxicated or under the influence when they entered into the contract. If they can prove they weren't of their sound, sober mind, that may make the contract voidable. In order to fulfill the valid contract, we must have legally competent parties. Another essential element, another thing that the judge is looking for, and this is a red star, we're going to spend time on this one, especially as we get into Unit 10, is mutual assent. I would make a note. Mutual assent is also known as meeting of the minds. It's also known as offer and acceptance. Mutual assent, meeting of the minds, offer and acceptance. The parties have to agree to enter into the contract together. An offer must be made, considered, and eventually accepted by both parties. So more on that. Mutual assent is meeting of the minds, also known as offer and acceptance. When we get into Unit 10, we're going to talk about counter offers, options when you're presented an offer, all that good stuff is coming. Legality of object, again, you cannot have a legally binding contract for an ill purpose. Any acts of discrimination would make a contract, a sales contract, illegal. Forgery would make a sales contract illegal. You got to have legality of object. And then there's that consideration. And again, the consideration is a problem topic. Consideration can be money. Yes. Consideration is just something of value, and it doesn't have to be valuable to you. And I think that's where we get stuck somewhere. You could say, you know, for a free weekend at the beach. Well, maybe you're not a beach person, and to you, there's no value in that. But can't you put a price tag on it? Whether or not it means something to you or not, you can put a price tag on it, and that's what we mean by consideration. There are no free promises. Contracts are bilateral, they're two-way streets. So in order for me to do this, I need some kind of consideration. So these are your essential elements. As we said, contracts do have to be in writing, but it's not required of the essential elements. We're going to talk about the in writing piece in just a second. Remember when we talked about those essential elements of a valid deed? It's the similar conversation. Now we're just trying to determine the validity of a contract. And if we take this to the judge is looking for these four pieces. If they don't have it in writing, it's unenforceable. If you have that minor, it's voidable. If we're missing one of these pieces, it is void. Also with contracts, similar back to this mutual assent a little bit, this meeting of the minds. we have to have reality of consent. So we got to have the parties consent. We got to have the parties agree to enter into the contract. And with reality of consent, you can't have duress. Duress is the violence or the threat of violence. If you threaten somebody to enter into a contract, they could take it to a judge. If they could prove it, they could take it to a judge and get out. If somebody enters into a contract under duress, they have felt violence or the threat of violence, duress may be able to make it voidable. One party can go to the judge and say, I was scared not to enter into this contract. If you can prove it, the judge will make it voidable. Undue influence. We cannot enter into a contract under undue influence. Undue influence is the threat of maybe mental or emotional harm. Mom, I'm not coming home for Christmas this year if you don't sell the house. Did mom feel threatened? Did mom feel under influence? I played on her emotions. You know, another example of undue influence, I think the one that we see most often, and this one hurts me so bad. You may hire a caretaker to care for your elderly family member, and that family member may convince, that caretaker may convince the family member to sell their home to them. And that could be under undue influence. They're taking advantage of their relationship. So duress is the physical, undue influence is the mental. You're messing with somebody's mind. And again, if you can prove that you entered into this contract under undue influence, the judge may make it voidable. Misrepresentation and fraud are both incorrect information. There's incorrect information in the contract. The difference in contract world, the difference in misrepresentation and fraud is intent. And the judge may have to determine if the misrepresentation, the false information in the contract was an accident versus if it was done purposely. I knew I was lying to you to get you to enter into this contract. That is fraud. So for the judge to determine, misrepresentation and fraud could both make this contract voidable. Let's say, for example, I'm getting ready to sell. I have 10 acres of land and I'm getting ready to put it on the market and sell it. And I've owned it for, I don't know, maybe I inherited it 20 years ago. And I've just hung on to it because, you know, it's land. So I'm going to hang on to it and see what I can do with it. Now, fast forward 20 years and I know what I need this land for. I need some money. So I'm going to sell this 10 acres of land. I advertise 10, I promote 10, I put 10 acres all over the place. Buyer comes in, makes an offer, I accept, we go under contract. Buyer has a survey done. Lo and behold, there's only 7 acres of land. We are both shocked. I thought I had 7 acres. That's why I told you 7 acres. Like I said, I inherited it. I didn't get a survey done or anything. That's misrepresentation. I didn't mean to lie to you, but guess what? I still got false information out there. I still misrepresented the property. Fraud, I have 7 acres. I know darn well I have 7 acres, but I advertised 10. The difference is intent. Both may be able to make the contract voidable. Mistake of fact probably isn't going to do much of the contract, may be voidable. Kind of a fine line here between misrepresentation and mistake of fact. Both may, mistake of fact may be able to make it voidable. Again, this is all up to the judge. So this reality of consent, this mutual assent, back to what we said at the beginning, the parties have to enter into the contract voluntarily. And if you don't have a reality of consent, you don't have mutual assent. If you don't have mutual assent, then you're missing an essential element and we don't have a valid contract. Questions so far? So let's talk about the offer. An offer is made. The parties to the offer. You guys remember your ORs and EEs from the beginning of Unit 5? We talked about the giver and the receivee. So who are the parties? The offeror and the offeree. The offeror is the giver of the offer. The offeree is the receivee of the offer. You guys like to assign roles. The buyer's given the offer to the seller. Thus, the buyer's the offeror and the seller's the offeree. And I will say 9.8 times out of 10, that's the way it works. Buyer makes the offer to the seller. But you may have times where the seller makes the offer to the buyer. We're going to talk about what happens in a counter offer in just a second. What I say to you guys is, don't get bogged down with buyer and seller. It is way too easy on your test to say buyer and seller. If they do, I need you to call them offeror or offeree. The offeror is the person giving the offer. The offeree is the person receiving the offer. So what we have here is our contract formation wall. And on one side of the contract formation wall, we have the buyer. On the other side of the contract formation wall, we have the seller. As I said, 9.8 times out of 10, I just made that number up. The buyer's going to be the one giving the offer to the seller. So we got to identify who is the offeror or who is the offeree. So if the buyer's making the offer to the seller, the buyer's the offeror, the seller's the offeree. Your ORs and EEs is what you're looking for here. Whenever an offeree receives an offer, and we're going to talk more about this. When an offeree receives an offer, they always have three choices. They can accept it. If they accept it, they're agreeing to all of the terms exactly how they are. Acceptance means you agree to everything exactly like it is. Another option the offeree has is to reject it. If you reject an offer, you've killed it. It's dead on the table. There is no reviving a rejected offer. Once you say, no, I reject, that offer is done. So offerees, three choices. They can accept it. They can reject it. Their third choice is they can counter it. A counter offer is a rejection with a but or a however. I'm rejecting your offer. I'm good with all of the terms of the offer except the purchase price and the closing date. I have rejected your offer and I have presented a brand new offer with different terms. In the case of a counter offer, the roles reverse. When we counter, the offeror becomes the offeree becomes the offeror. So the buyer made the offer to the seller. The seller has three choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. I think we should all go through that together. Buyer makes an offer to the seller. Offer or makes an offer to the offeree. The offeree has three choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. In a counteroffer, the roles reverse. The seller has rejected this offer, and they have presented a brand new offer to the buyer. The seller becomes the offeror, the buyer becomes the offeree. Is the buyer bound at this point? Is the buyer committed? Are we under contract? I got a counteroffer, and now my buyer's the offeree. Are they bound? Are they committed to the seller? No. They have three choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. Anytime an offeree receives an offer, they always have three choices. A counter offer would reverse these roles again. Every time you counter, those roles reverse. Ideally, in a sales negotiation, a sales contract, typically speaking, you have the sellers that start up here, the buyers kind of start here. Each counter hopefully brings us a little closer and a little closer together. If we get to the point we've countered so much, eventually somebody's got to accept it or reject it, because at some point there's nothing else left to counter. The only thing to end a counter offer is acceptance or rejection. But it's important that we understand all offerees have three choices: accept it, reject it, or counter it. We are getting to when the parties are bound. We will talk about when they're bound, but right now we're still in the throes of negotiations. Questions on this piece? More on this. We'll see the contract formation wall again. We will build on this. We will definitely spend more time. Like I said, we have this magic moment in time when it goes from being an offer to a contract, when we have that acceptance, when we have that bound. And we, of course, will talk about it. You guys go ahead and set your chats to private. I got a question for you guys. And in a private chat, we introduced you to an act in Unit 5. And this act said that there are certain documents that have to be recorded to be enforceable. Name that act. And spelling doesn't count. I know what you speak of because I don't spell either. So I got you. The act in Unit 5 said there are certain documents that have to be recorded. Why do we record? So they are enforceable. What you're doing now is telling me in a chat what that act is. I feel like I see pages of the book flipping. So the act that we introduced you to in Unit 5 was the Connor Act. Please write that down. Connor Act says there are certain documents that must be recorded. Why do we record them? So they're enforceable. We're going to do a side-by-side comparison. I'm building up to a problem topic. Does everybody have Connor jotted down? Connor equals record. Connor equals record. Draw a line down the center of your page, and on the other side of the line, write statute of frauds. Statute of frauds says there are certain documents that have to be writing and signed. Why? To be enforceable. Remember, we said if we don't have it in writing, it is unenforceable. It's not the judge, it's the statute of frauds that requires. Connor says we record. Statute of fraud says we put it in writing and sign. I think a side-by-side comparison is helpful so we can see the difference. The only difference is Connor records. Statute of fraud says put it in writing and sign. Statute of frauds does apply to any conveyances of interest of real estate, specifically on page 261. The second paragraph there specifically tells us what the statute of frauds requires to be in writing. 261. What does the statute of frauds specifically say has to be in writing? Deeds, contracts for sale, mortgages, options, easements, leases for more than 3 years. These are the things that statute of frauds says has to be in writing to sign and signed in order to be enforceable. The whole point of the statute of frauds is try to prevent forgery, try to prevent dishonest conduct, false testimony, somebody, signing, and I said try to, because, you still get forged documents, but the statute of frauds makes that number a lot less. Do I have questions on the statute of frauds versus the Connor Act? Another term we get, what's the difference in being recorded and in writing? If it's in writing, you have, and I do not have, are you kidding me? I do not have a piece of paper. Here's one. If something is in writing, then we have something tangible. We have the document, something we could touch or print out and touch. If it's recorded, it means it's recorded down at the courthouse, down at the public records. And each county has their own public records. So statute of frauds and Connor Act kind of run side by side because I can't record it if it's not in writing. So many things that the statute of fraud requires to be in writing, Connor says, well, since you got it in writing, let's go ahead and record it. Does the Connor Act need to be acknowledged by the other party? No, Connor just says we got to record this. Connor just says we got to record so it's enforceable. We talked about the Connor Act in Unit 5 when we were talking about the importance of having your deed recorded. Remember, recordation of a deed is not an essential element of a deed. It's Connor that steps in and says, if you want this thing enforceable, I'm going to require you to record it. Another term we get in our basic contract law, something called the parole evidence rule. The parole evidence rule says the final written word of the contract is going to override any previous negotiations, advertisements, verbal agreements, whatever. The final written word of the contract will prevail. For example, remember we talked about the refrigerator. The refrigerator is personal property. The refrigerator is also probably the #1 negotiated personal property item. So let's say you're taking a listing and buyers are going to ask if the fridge is going to remain. So you go ahead and ask the sellers at the listing appointment, are you willing to leave the fridge if the buyer wants it with an acceptable offer? And the seller says, oh yeah, fridge is included, no problem. You put that in your MLS advertising. You tell everybody in the world, fridge to remain with an acceptable offer. Buyer becomes interested. Buyer looks at their agent and says, and I get the fridge, right? Buyer's agent says, oh yeah, it's in the ad. We'll get you the fridge. Everybody's in agreement that the fridge is going to convey. The seller's going to leave the fridge. An offer's made and accepted, but guess what the agents forgot to put in? The fridge. Per the parole evidence rule, is the seller contractually obligated to leave the fridge? And the parole evidence rule says no, because it didn't make it into the final written contract. We talked about it 20 times. We saw it in the ads. It's all been good, but none of that matters if it doesn't make it into the final written word. And that's what the parole evidence rule says, that all points of agreement need to be in the final written word. Another basic contract law verbiage is something called time is of the essence. Time is of the essence is a drop dead date and time in which something has to be complete. We must do this by 5 p.m. on this date. At 5:01, if it's not complete, then the non-performing party may be able to breach. They may be in breach, which may give an out to the party that performed. We got 2 time is of the essence in our sales contracts. So we'll revisit this. But there's specifically a drop dead date and time. Something has to be done by this date and time. If not, we could be dealing with breaches of the parties. So we'll see time is of the essence. You guys still got your chats set to private? If not, set them, please. I got a question for you guys. Remind me in a private chat what an amendment does. We talked about an amendment in Unit 6 with zoning. And we said if we have a zoning amendment, what are we doing? What does an amendment do? An amendment. Think of that zoning amendment. So an amendment is a change. And in basic contract world, an amendment changes an already existing agreement. We have a contract in place. We have our legally binding document. Parties have agreed, everybody signed. We are under contract. But now we enter into round 2 of negotiations. Maybe in lieu of repairs, for example, we're going to renegotiate the purchase price. If we come to a renegotiated purchase price, then we have agreed to change what we already agreed to. An amendment is a change. Compare an amendment to an addenda. When we see addenda, what I really want you guys to see is the word add. An addenda adds to and becomes part of the offer, and upon acceptance becomes part of the contract. So an addenda adds to, an amendment changes. We discussed an addendum, I guess it was Unit 20, when we talked about lead-based paint. And we discussed our lead-based paint hazard addenda. The addenda added to, it didn't change anything. It added to and became part of the offer, and upon acceptance becomes part of the contract. So again, in just defining words and putting that out, we need to see that side-by-side comparison of a change, an amendment versus something that adds to. Questions so far? I can't believe we're at last break already. This morning's just zoom by, but here we are. So let's go ahead and take 10. We come back, we'll get through most of 9 today, if not all of it. We're back in contract world. The cameras are on, headphones coming on. Let me go ahead and take attendance. And again, just still kind of defining things, getting this basic contract order. A couple other terms. An assignment, if you are assigning your contractual rights, then you are giving your rights, you're assigning your rights to somebody else. With an assignment, generally speaking, and yes, I have taken attendance, so thank you for letting me know you're back. When in doubt, tell me you're back. With an assignment, generally speaking, the only thing that changes is the name of one of the parties. All the terms stay the same. You agree to take my contractual obligation as it is. The assignor is the giver of the assignment. The assignee is the receiving. There's our O-R and E again. Whether or not a contract can be assigned has to be spelled out in the contract. So whether or not a contract can be assigned, and if so, what does that look like? How does that work? That'll need to be spelled out in the contract. I think a good example of an assignment, if you have somebody sublet or take over your lease, the landlord stays the same. The terms of the lease stay the same. The only thing that changed was the name of the tenant. You assigned your contractual duties and obligations to somebody else. A novation then is a substitution of a contract. So we're going to substitute. We already have a legally binding contract. A novation says we're going to substitute with a new one. Maybe this contract was negotiated old school and it was done on paper with a pen. And anytime you make a change, basic contract law says anytime you change something in writing, the only way to change it is in writing. So we're negotiating, we're countering back and forth. And every time we renegotiate the purchase price, we have to cross it out, write in a new purchase price. Parties have to agree to it. It might be after a while, after a few trips across the desk, it might be that is hard to read. So we might do best to substitute, to do a novation and substitute the contract that we actually agreed to over the one that we negotiated on. Another example of a novation I had a couple years ago, I was so excited because I had an example of a novation. But I was listing a property for sale, and my sellers were flippers. So what they did for a living, they came in, they bought a house, they did the repairs and flipped it, and then turned around and put it back on the market. That's when I got involved, when they were ready to put it back on the market. Buyer came in and made an offer. The buyer was getting an FHA loan. And we're going to talk about FHA when we get to our financing. But there are provisions. There's some things to consider with the FHA loan. And one thing that I didn't know, we learn something every day, don't we? And one thing I didn't know, and obviously the buyer's agent didn't know either, is that the FHA requires sellers to own the property for 90 days before they can contract to sell it. My sellers had owned it for 89 days. We were so close, but 89 is not 90, right? And the lender called and said, the underwriter will kick this back because they require that 90 days. So what do? We sat still. We were patient until like tomorrow on day 90, where we did a novation. And we had everybody sign it on that day. So it's all in the lenders and the underwriters compliance. It was all good. We did a novation. We substituted the contract on day 90 for the one on day 89. I said, oh, for goodness sakes, one day. A day is a day is a day. The discharge of contracts, or how contracts end. Again, basic contract world, how they end. Probably the most common way for a contract to end is full performance. Once both parties have done what they agreed to do in the contracts, once both terms have been fulfilled. You know, for our sales contract, the seller promises to sell, convey their property, and in exchange, the consideration is the purchase price, the sales price. So once the seller conveys that property and the buyer pays the purchase price, those terms have been fulfilled. Full performance has terminated or discharged this contract. Impossibility to perform, if one party can't do as promised, they just can't do it. For example, we go under contract with a pre-approval for the buyer from the lender, but the pre-approval is no guarantee. And if we find out when we're under contract that your buyer's not going to get loan approval, it's impossible for them to perform unless they got cash stuffed in a mattress somewhere. It is impossible for them to perform if they don't have loan approval. What if we're under contract and the seller goes into foreclosure? They lose the property to foreclosure. The court has taken the property. It's impossible for the seller to perform at that point. They no longer own the property. So impossibility to perform could end the contract. There will be consequences of breach, of course. Mutual agreement. The parties agreed to enter into the contract together. Remember our mutual assent or a meeting of the minds? They agreed to enter into a contract together. So the parties can agree to get out of the contract. The parties can agree to release each other. Operation of law, the judge takes the property, foreclosure, eminent domain, adverse possession. It is no longer the seller's to sell. The court takes the property. Operation of law will terminate the contract. And then mutual breach of the contract, again, if it's very clear what the parties' duties and obligations are. So if either party doesn't do what the contract says they should, they're in breach, and that would end a contract. We'll talk more about breach in just a second. And with this mutual agreement, with this agree to release each other, again, there's several different ways that can look. I don't want you to get too bogged down into this, but this is just another way of saying that the parties can mutually agree to get out of the contract. They agreed to get into it. So they could agree to release each other. They could agree both to release each other from the terms and obligations of the contract. They could do a novation. They could agree to substitute one contract for another. Maybe that substitutes the parties. Maybe that's an assignment within a novation. Modifying the agreement, there's our amendment. Changing, modifying. Accord and satisfaction is like partial performance. Like maybe I promised when you buy my house, there will be a name brand dishwasher, a brand new name brand dishwasher. What's your favorite brand? I will give you that brand dishwasher. Partial performance, I go to buy that dishwasher for you and that brand's not available. And you say, well, that's fine. I'll take Whirlpool instead of Samsung, whatever. That would be accord and satisfaction. It's partial agreement. We've agreed. I'm still going to get you a dishwasher. Just not the specifics of the brand that we agreed to. And then cancellation. This is the old school way of doing things before like fancy laptops and internets and everything. You were actually on paper. When parties were done with a contract, they would actually take their red marker and write cancel across it. That cancels a contract faster than what I know anything to do. They physically canceled it. Again, don't get bogged down on this. Just different ways that the parties may agree to release each other or discharge each other from the contracts. When it comes to interpretation of contracts, again, the judge is the one that gets to interpret it. And when it comes to interpretation of the contracts, there are certain things that the judge is going to consider. They're going to interpret the contract as a whole. So we're not going to piecemeal the contract. We're not going to say page 1 is good, but page 2 isn't. The contract itself is either all good or it's not. We're not going to piecemeal it. We're not going to break it up into chunks. We're going to interpret it as a whole. And that does include any addenda that may be added to it. The judge is going to interpret the contracts per their ordinary meaning. You guys are learning how to speak broker. And when you get licensed, you're going to be speaking broker more. Our industry's language, our industry's jargon, our acronyms, our abbreviations don't belong in the contract. Remember, in the sales contract, we are creating a legally binding document for buyers and sellers. And the words we put in, they need to be able to pick up and read the contract and know what those words mean. So our jargon, our verbiage, our broker speak, if you will, does not belong in the contract. Spell it out for anybody to understand. And then similar to that is any ambiguous terms, any terms that are unclear or uncertain. If there's anything ambiguous, anything that could go one way or the other, the judge is going to interpret that against the party that prepared, against the party that put in that ambiguous language. As mentioned earlier, all good contracts have what happens if either party breaches, what happens if one party doesn't do what they promised to do. And so some contract remedies, what happens if one party breaches. The contract will have to spell out those, well, may spell out those remedies. The first set of remedies we look at are money damages. These are all the non-breaching party going after money damages. Compensatory damages, the non-breaching party, if they're going after compensatory damages, what they're going after is the money needed to make themselves whole again. And with compensatory damages, I always think of receipts and invoices. I can prove to you the money that I spent on this transaction. And because you were in breach, I should be entitled to get that money back. How much do you owe me? Well, here's my invoices. Here's my receipts. Here's proof of the money that I spent on this transaction. I think a good place that we see this is the buyer going after the breaching seller. So the buyer may have had a home inspection done. Maybe they've had the appraisal done. They have spent money on this transaction. And then the seller can't or won't convey clear marketable title. And the buyer may say, I want to be made whole again. I want to be reimbursed for the money that I spent. Compensatory damages is not like above and beyond. It's not pain and suffering. Again, it's meant to make the non-breaching party whole again. I'll skip liquidated for now. I'll come back to that in just a second. Consequential damages or special damages. These are proven to fail to occur because one party didn't meet their contractual obligations. So let's say we're under contract, you're under contract to buy my house, and you breach. I could go after you for consequential damages. My consequential damages could be the attorney fees. I had to hire the attorney to go after you because you breached. Those could be our consequential. They wouldn't have occurred. I wouldn't have had those attorney fees if the consequences didn't play out for you to breach. Both compensatory and consequential damages, neither one of those, the first one and the third one, neither one of those are spelled out in such a way in the contract. If the breaching party isn't willing to sit down and cut a check to the non-breaching party, then the non-breaching party can take you to court. Now there's attorney fees and all that good stuff to deal with. Liquidated damages are also money damages, but liquidated damages are amounts agreed on as part of the contract negotiations. We agree when we enter into this contract. If you breach, this is how much I'm going to get. Liquidated damages. It is spelled out in the contract. We will learn in our contract that liquidated damages are awarded to the seller in the event of the buyer's breach. So we know going into this, if your buyer breaches, this is how much the seller's getting. If the buyer's not willing to sit down and cut a check, seller takes them to court, judge looks at the contract and says, well, it says right here, you agree to this. What's the problem? Now we have attorney's fees. So the buyer will probably not only have to pay those liquidated damages, but the consequential damages, the seller will want them to pay their attorney fees as well. See how these can all kind of tie in together if we really, really wanted them to. So liquidated damages, we'll see. Again, all money damages in the event of one party's breach. Other contract remedies, non-money damages. We have a contract remedy called specific performance. And in specific performance, the non-breaching party is going after the breaching party in court to make them perform as promised. Where we see this in real estate is the buyer going after the breaching seller. So the seller decides not to sell. Maybe they wake up one day and change their mind. It happens. The buyer has a choice. They could go after them for those money damages. They could go after them for specific performance. And if the buyer is awarded specific performance, the judge is making the seller perform. What's the seller's obligation? To pass clear marketable title. They're making the seller perform as promised. Now, obviously, if the seller can't pass clear marketable title, then specific performance isn't an option for the buyer. This is if they choose not to. So the buyer suing the seller, going after specific performance may be an option. Both remedy options of the buyer for the contract or money damages and specific performance are spelled out in the contract. So we'll see that again. And then another contract remedy is a rescission. If you rescind your contract, you take your contract back. If you put down any money, you'll get your money back. Both parties go about their lives as if this contract never happened. Both parties are put back into the position they were in before we went under contract. You guys can show me. Who remembers how many days the buyer has to rescind their timeshare contract? How many days does the buyer have to rescind their timeshare contract? It's 1 of 2, right? What do you remember about timeshares? 5, 5, 5, 10, jazz hands. So how many days? That one is 5. The buyer has 5 days to rescind. If you're wondering what the other ones are in the 10, go back to unit 2. Good opportunity to refresh. Show me, how many days does the buyer have to rescind their contract on a new construction condominium? New construction condominium. Yep. And that one is 7 days. So that's what we talk about rescinding. You take that contract back, and the contract specifically says you have 7 days to rescind. You have 7 days to take your contract back. If you put down any deposits, you'll get your money back. But both parties go about their lives as if this contract never happened. When it comes to going after parties in a court of law, there's another statute, not specific to real estate. This is court of law. Something called the statute of limitations. this is your window to sue. Once the statute of limitations is run out, you've lost your right to sue. In each situation, I believe this is like a case by case situation, how long you have to sue. I think bottom line, a good rule of thumb, if you're going to sue somebody, do it sooner rather than later. Because once your statute of limitations runs out, you've lost that right to sue. Questions on our contract remedies? Let's bring this home. Law student hat off. Let's talk about what all this means for us, the broker. First off, get this in your head right now. I cannot draft legally binding documents. That is the job of the attorney. We cannot draft. I can't add provisions. I can't just cross stuff out. I'm not an attorney. The only thing I'm allowed to do, attorneys have provided us, in the North Carolina Association of Realtors has provided us pre-printed forms. And all we're allowed to do is fill in the blanks. So the agency agreements that we looked at were a pre-printed form that I'm allowed to fill in the blanks. Our sales contract is a pre-printed form, and all I'm allowed to do is fill in the blanks. The pre-printed forms are there for a reason. They're meant to reduce our temptation to draft. They're meant for some unity. All of us across the state pretty much use the same contract, the one that we're going to look at in Unit 10. Some exceptions, of course, that we will address. But providing us with these pre-printed forms, it reduces our temptation to draft. With that being said, it's not the consumer's job to know my job. That's my job to know my job. Consumers will ask. Buyers and sellers will ask on the regular, can't you just add this? Can't you just do that? And this is us knowing to stay in our lane. I can't just, and they'll ask because I'm a lot cheaper than an attorney. So they'll ask, but we need to know when to follow their lawful instructions, and drafting, putting, adding, legally binding, anything is the job of the attorney. Questions on this? Fun fact for you. The parties to the contract can add, edit, delete. So if we're talking about the sales contract, the parties to the contract are the buyer and the seller. The parties can, but just because they can doesn't always mean that they should. As their agent, as their broker, when our buyers or sellers pick up their red pen and say, we're going to fix this, we need to advise them to talk to an attorney. We need to highly advise them to talk to an attorney because they don't know. It's like the domino effect. If I change this one thing, how's it going to affect the rest of the contract? I don't know. I'm not an attorney. I can't answer that. So they can, the parties to the contract can add, edit, delete, but we need to advise them not to. The last little section in this is talking about auctions. Remember, we mentioned auctions. back in unit 7. Please hear me before you start writing. I don't even want you guys to pretend like auctions exist unless the test question says something about an auction. If they don't put auction in your brain, you don't need to put it there. Is everybody with me so far? So if you get a test question about auction, then you worry about it. If not, just pretend like they don't exist. And with real estate auction sales, there are two types of auctions. There's auctions with reserve, there's auctions without reserve. An auction with reserve means that the seller has the right to stop the bidding if they're not happy with how it's going. So the bid's too low, the seller's not satisfied. With reserve, they can say, no, we're not doing this. This isn't going how I want it to. Without reserve then means they don't have that right. They get what they get. And something that makes an auction sale, another thing that makes it so unique, once that gavel comes down and the auctioneer says sold, congratulations, folks, we are under contract. The auctioneer has the right to bind the seller. Now, this is unique. Remember, we said the sales agent is a special agent. And as a special agent, how much ability do I have to bind? As a special agent? Yeah, 0, right? 0. This is different. This is why auctions are different. The auctioneer is duly licensed. The auctioneer has a real estate license, but they also have an auctioneer's license. And that unique combination, that unique situation gives them the right to bind. So the gavel comes down, the auctioneer says sold. Congratulations, we're under contract. Obviously, the next step is going to be to put that in writing, but that's just for formalities at this point. Questions? Auction sales is what you need to know if it comes up. I'm going to, another term I need to define, and it's not in unit 9, you'll find it in unit 10. And for me, it's just in a really weird place and I tend to forget about it. So I'm going to go ahead and define it now while we're in unit 9, of course, with reference to where you can find it in your book down there at the bottom right. But another term that we come across is something that's contingent, or it has a contingency on it. So a contingency is dependent on something else. So let's say, for example, we agree to a contingency. And what that contingency says is, I'm not legally obligated to perform if something doesn't happen first. If that never happens, I'm not legally obligated to perform. Common examples of contingencies that we might find in real estate. I cannot buy your house if I can't get a loan. I can't buy your house if I don't first sell mine. Me buying your house is contingent on something else happening. This is what we need to know about contingencies now. Our sales contract does not have any built-in contingencies. There are no contingencies in our pre-printed sales contract. Let me ask you this. Can the parties agree to add a contingency? Can the parties negotiate and agree to add a contingency? And the answer is sure. The parties can agree to whatever is legal. Contingencies are very legal. What you and I need to know is we don't have any built into the contract. If there's a contingency, it's because the parties agreed to add it. The other thing about a contingency is we don't have pre-printed forms for these. So if the parties are adding a contingency, what might we have to do? Here's another one of our CYAs. Call their attorney. Call the buyer's or the seller's attorney. They can draft that legally binding. I don't have a form for it, but that doesn't mean they can't add it. No built-in contingencies. Oh, here's another example. Buyer's offer is made on the condition that they get approval from the zoning board to use the property as they intended. If the seller agrees, the contingency is approval by the zoning board. So if the zoning board doesn't approve it, the buyer's not obligated to buy. This has to happen before we can move forward. That's all a contingency is. Questions? Whole semester of law school. Blew through it. Again, the trick to Unit 9 are those key terms. Understanding those words. That key point review is on page 266. And then your student quiz on 268. As we've been saying, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. So yes, you're going to get some test questions from Unit 8. Nope, Unit 9, wherever we are. Questions on Unit 9. Basic contract law. And on we go. Unit 10 is going to be specific to our sales contract, our standard offer to purchase and contract, and then practices as they relate to sales contracts. So we're going to talk about when that offer becomes a contract. We're going to talk about how we as brokers handle, submit, present offers, more to the real estate side of it, the in-practice side of it in Unit 10. So our guide for Unit 10, I'll tell you right now, the star of Unit 10 is our offer to purchase and contract, our standard Form 2T. Again, this is not the only one we're allowed to use. We will talk about that. This is the one that's used the most often. No, you don't have to know 2T, but we do need to know that we're looking at the standard offer to purchase and contract. As mentioned, we're going to explain those sales contract procedures. So what are the license law and commission rules for us submitting the offer, dealing with the contract? We'll get into that. And then at the very end of Unit 10 is a bunch of green stars. Well, we're going to talk about some alternative land conveyance methods, some different way than the traditional method that we're so focused on in this class. I think I mentioned an installment land contract a couple weeks ago. Today we mentioned the option to purchase. Those are those alternative land conveyance methods that we're going to hit on at the end of Unit 10. So, sales contract. Again, the most commonly used one is the North Carolina Association of Realtors, NCAR, North Carolina Association of Realtors. It's the state level of the National Association of Realtors. And they provide us with all the pre-printed forms that we're allowed to use as brokers in dealing in real estate transactions. And probably of all the forms, guys, there's hundreds of forms. I'm not making that up. There are hundreds of forms. And of the forms, I'm going to say the most commonly one used is standard Form 2T, our offer to purchase and contract. A common misconception is that 2T is the only one that we're allowed to use. And that's not true. We can use any standard sales contract as long as it was drafted by an attorney and it meets Commission Rule 58A.0112. Again, you don't need to know that. I have it there for reference. You don't need to know the specifics of 58A.0112. What we need to know is that I am free to use any sales contract that I want, as long as it was drafted by an attorney and it satisfies commission rule. For example, many builders come with their own contract. Many builders use their own contract. Some firms have their own contract. Don't let those test questions fool you into thinking 2T is the only thing that we're allowed to use. I think another good thing to pull off this slide, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission does not provide us with our forms. The North Carolina Association of Realtors provides us with our forms, the pre-printed forms that we use. So just for reference, 58A.0111 is the commission rule that prohibits us from drafting. Brokers can't draft. 58A.0112 is the requirements of a pre-printed sales contract that I'm allowed to use. The parties can use whatever they want to. Once you're a broker and you're licensed, these are the pre-printed forms. Yeah, the parties could agree, you could buy my house on a Subway napkin. We don't have to have the official form. Doesn't it look much more professional if the real estate agent does? And that's why they got us covered. We're trying to reduce their temptation to draft. We're reducing our temptation to draft. The sales contract. The parties of the sales contract are the buyer and the seller. Did I say anything at all about the real estate agent? The parties to the contract are the buyer and the seller. Thus, we don't belong in the sales contract. It's not my contract. I'm just assisting the parties with it. So the big picture, any mention of us whatsoever does not belong in the contract. Specifically, we cannot make any reference whatsoever in the sales contract to our commission, bonuses, referrals, kickbacks, whatever you want to call it. No compensation whatsoever. Would I surprise you if I told you there have been cases where an agent like slipped themselves a $500 bonus in the contract, nobody caught it, everybody signed it, and then they tried to enforce it? How far do you think that made it in a court of law? The judge is going, you're the broker, you're not the buyer, the seller. Who are you? You're not a party to this contract. So the big picture, no mention of our compensation. Specifically, the other thing they say is I can't put in some kind of liability disclaimer to protect myself. So let's say, for example, my buyer doesn't want the home inspection. Not required, highly recommended, but not required. My buyer says, no, I'm not doing a home inspection. All right. I can't put that in the contract. I'm not going to put that in the contract. Buyer declined home inspection to protect me. We have another form that we don't see in this class. Maybe you'll get to meet it in post licensing. But we have another form that allows me and my client to sit down and they can select or waive the different services. So if they don't want the home inspection, I'm going to say, really? Are you sure? No, I don't want it. All right. I need you to initial here saying that you've waived the home inspection, that you've waived that right. So they, again, trying to make sure that we don't go beyond the parameters of the contract. They created a form for us just for that purpose, to try to reduce our temptation to put that liability disclaimer in the contract. The contract, the sales contract, is only specifically between the parties. The parties being the buyer and the seller. Nobody else has a role in that contract. Questions? When it comes to contract formation and communication, There's kind of some rules, some acts to be aware of. When it comes to our e-commerce, we have the UETA, the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. There's a state level of this, FYI, which is the North Carolina UETA, the North Carolina Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. And one thing that the UETA does, it addresses all e-commerce, e-documents, e-everything. But specifically, what the UET says is that your e-signatures, once you agree to allow your e-signature, then that counts as your legally binding signature. You guys have all signed something electronically. I know you did for Lane for this class. Didn't she have you sign a contract and agreement to be in this class? If you haven't, please done so she doesn't have to come find you. It's in your welcome email. Just go do it. And when you got the email from Lane and you clicked on what she wants you to sign, and she goes through a program called dotloop, and the terms and conditions popped up before you signed, and you carefully clicked on those terms and conditions and you read each word through very, very carefully before you signed, correct? Did you really? Come on. Did you? How often do we read those terms and conditions? I don't. We don't do it, do we? Had you read those, you would see that under the terms and conditions was that your e-signature counts as your legally binding signature. How many of your wet signature, which you put on paper with a pen, how many of your wet signature looks like your e-signature? Not often, right? Totally off. What matters is once you agree to those terms and conditions, you agree in part to allow that e-signature count as your legally binding signature. And that's all because of the UETA. I didn't read it either when she had me sign something, so don't feel bad. But just know we're all guilty of it. They just make it so dang hard, don't they? Why you got to have 20-some pages in legal speak to let me know my e-signature is binding? So let's talk more about this offer and acceptance. Get more and more into this. So we've decided, we've seen this. The offeror makes the offer to the offeree. And I like the contract formation wall. And we're going to start to build on this a little bit. So on one side, you have the buyer, and we're going to let the buyer making the offer to the seller. Again, please don't get bogged down with buyer and seller. This is just an example. So the buyer's the offeror making an offer to the seller, who is the offeree. And as the offeree, once they receive an offer, they have three choices. Those three choices are to accept, reject, or counter. All offerees have three choices. If you accept it, you agree, this is important, to all of the terms exactly how they are. All exactly. Any change, I don't care how small and insignificant it may seem, any change is not acceptance. If you're accepting, you're agreeing to all of the terms exactly how they are. One option. The offeree also has the option to reject. If you reject the offer, you've killed it. It's dead on the table. You said no, or thanks but no thanks, or however you want to say that. I do not accept your offer. I hereby reject it. That's it. That's it. Both parties go about their lives as if it never happened. Nobody's bound. Nobody's obligated. The other thing to understand with the rejection, there is no going back. Once you've rejected it, you're killed it. So let's say you make me an offer to buy my house and I say no, I reject it. And I wake up tomorrow and say, oh man, I should have accepted their offer. I can't call you and say, never mind, I want to accept it. When I said no, when I rejected it, I killed it. It's done. Could I call you tomorrow and present a brand new offer with those exact same terms? Sure. But we can't go back to the offer that we rejected. Our third choice is to counter it. A counter offer is a rejection. A counter offer is a rejection with a but or a however. A counter offer may sound something like, I'm good with all the terms, but the purchase price. We've agreed to all the other terms, but we are countering the purchase price. And in a counter offer, the roles reverse. The seller is now making a brand new offer to the buyer. I'm good with all these terms, but the purchase price. The seller becomes the offeror. The buyer becomes the offeree. The buyer has three choices. They can accept it, reject it, or counter. The only thing to end a counter offer is acceptance or rejection. Again, typically speaking, you got the sellers up here, the buyers here. Each counter gets us a little closer together. And hopefully in the end, we can come to terms with acceptance or we just reject it. Questions on our offer and acceptance. So there's this magic moment in time when it goes from being an offer to a contract. Do you guys think it's important that we as brokers know when that offer is a legally binding contract? You better believe it is. Because aren't we the ones calling our buyers and sellers and saying, hey, we're under contract. And we better know what it is we're saying when we're making that phone call. So there's this magic moment in time when it goes from being an offer to a contract. And that magic moment in time requires 2 steps. In order for the offer to become the contract, we have to have the last offeree accepts. For your exams, when you see in the problem, accept, know that it's been signed. I don't need you sitting there on your test wondering if it's been, because we already said if you got verbal, you got nothing, right? In the real world, you're going to worry about that. In pre-licensing world, once you know that it's been accepted, once you see that it's been accepted, you know that it has been signed. Acceptance means signature. So step 1, the last offeree accepts. Step 2, that communication of acceptance has to go back to the person making the offer. The person that makes the offer has got to know that their offer has been accepted. So back to our contract formation wall. Buyer makes an offer to the seller. The offeror makes an offer to the offeree. The offeree has 3 choices. They can accept, reject, and counter. I feel like you guys should do that with me. This is fun. You should try it. What are the offeree's 3 choices? They can accept it, reject it, or counter it. See, wasn't that a good time? We have acceptance. The last offeree, remember if there's a counter offer, the roles reverse. The last offeree accepts which means in pre-licensing world that they have signed. Now that they have signed the offer, communication of acceptance, the fact that your offer has been signed, has got to cross the contract formation line. The person making the offer has got to be notified that their offer has been accepted. When we come back together on Thursday, I'm going to start right on this slide because it's that important. We're going to start on Thursday on this slide. We're going to talk about the acceptable forms of communication. What forms of communication are we allowed to use to form our communication of acceptance? We're also going to talk about our contract formation line once the brokers get involved. So once buyers and sellers hire an agent, where do we stand in this contract formation wall? So we're going to pick up, I don't want to say much more, kind of leave you with a little bit of a teaser. And we're going to pick up here on Thursday. Again, it'll allow us to go through this little exercise again, talk about those different forms of communication, and talk about what happens when an agent is involved. On Thursday, the star of the show is going to be our standard offer to purchase and contract. Yes, you have standard form 2T printed in your book, but it is out of date. So remember, anytime you're looking at a contract, you want to go to the online learning system. I have 2T in the online learning system with highlights. If we remember from our agency agreements, if it's highlighted, it's in the syllabus. If it's in the syllabus, it's a candidate for your exam. So if you want to look ahead, you may just want to look at the highlights in 2T in the online learning system. Just look at the categories. We're going to go through, that's going to be where we are most of Thursday, is going through looking at the sales contract and wrapping up as much as we can with Unit 10. We have a midterm coming up. We're not going to have time to do it in class, so it will be an out-of-class assignment, but I'm not going to make that available until next Tuesday, a week from today. So we'll talk about that. I got to get through Unit 10 before I can give you guys the midterm, and I'm going to give you a whole week. Is a week fair? I'm asking you for like 2 hours in a week to take the midterm. I think that's more than reasonable. So we'll talk about it a little bit on Thursday, but I don't want it to sneak up on anybody. We'll have the big conversation about the midterm a week from today, and we'll make it available after class once we finish the Unit 10 material. So details to follow on that. What questions do I have on anything? All right. My stomach's grumbling, so I think it's lunchtime. What do y'all think? Let's go get some lunch. I mentioned Subway. I think that's where I'm heading. Subliminal advertising. So y'all have a good afternoon. Have a good day tomorrow. And sales contract Unit 10 on Thursday. Thank you.